So I went to school right up I-10 from here, Westchester Junior High. Don't look for it, it's no longer there. When I left, they tore the place down. That was not related. But it was there that I tried out for the basketball team. I always wanted to be on a school basketball team because my dad raised me to be a fan of the Houston Cougars. He did his MBA at U of H, and that was during the Phi Slamma Jamma days, so I was really excited to be a fan of the Houston Cougars. So I really wanted to play basketball, and I practiced, and I went to try out, and I know to look at me, you probably think I get asked a lot, you probably play basketball, and I did. But what I lack in height, I make up for lack of ability. So when I tried out, the coach said that I'm going to put you on the team. You can wear the jersey, you can come to the practice, you can come to the game, but you're never going to play. And I said, all right, that's fine. But he was wrong. Whenever we were up by like 40 or down by 40, I was your guy to put in. And the first time we were either up or down by 40, Coach said, Fred, because that was my name back then, Fred, it's your turn. And so I got up there. I was so excited. I was so pumped. I was going to go out there. It was going to be my Rudy moment, even though that wasn't a movie yet. And I knelt by the scorer's table, and I grabbed onto, there was a rack of basketballs that were right there by the scorer's table. And I grabbed onto that for balance. And I waited for them to buzz me in. I was so excited. And they buzzed me in, and I just started running, and I didn't let go of that rack of basketballs. And it just went all over the court. They had to stop the game. The coach called me back, put me right back on the bench. There were a lot of barriers to me playing basketball. There were a lot of barriers to me playing basketball, and those barriers I never overcame. But there's other barriers I met in life, and some I was able to overcome, and some I wasn't able to overcome. That's life. Life is not just us sailing through a bunch of green lights. Even though it seems maybe other people are having that experience, they're not. You know, in life, we face these barriers, and some we do overcome, and some we don't, and we learn from those. And that's kind of how I learned resilience as a child. It was meeting those barriers and that struggle. So it was a good thing in that way, but there's some barriers, some struggles that knock you to your knees. That not only you don't know if you can overcome those barriers, but you don't know if there's going to be an end to this suffering and this not knowing. I think that's what the women were facing in today's gospel. In today's gospel, we hear the women on that first Easter morn. We hear that when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, they brought spices, and they said to one another, well, who will roll away this stone? They had already faced so much. They had followed Jesus for a long time, the disciples as well, and the crowds too. And, you know, some of them really knew Jesus. Jesus had become a friend. They were students of Jesus. They were his disciples. They were following Jesus. And they had watched him do so many things since he had come on the scene. He had taught about God's kingdom in ways that they hadn't experienced before. And then they showed them what God's kingdom looked like through his healings and his feeding and casting out demons, all these miracles. He showed them and he told them about what God's kingdom was like. And so they thought, and for good reason, that he was the Messiah. He was the one that had come to save them all. And even though he had warned them about his death, that didn't really sink in. I think they were just kind of overwhelmed with the whole experience of following Jesus. And then he was betrayed. And he was arrested. And he was denied. And then they watched him suffer and die on the cross. And not only did they watch their friend and the rabbi, their teacher, suffer and die on the cross, they watched all their hopes and their dreams. Their hopes and their dreams die on that cross. How they thought the world was going to be different now. It's going to be different now. that all died on the cross for them. And I don't know if you've ever had a similar experience where you're really counting on something. You're counting on something that you trusted in. It was really going to be a new beginning for you, and then that was just ripped away. And you watch that dream die. That's what these women experienced. And on that first Easter morn, they didn't have any hopes and dreams. They were just going to that tomb, and they were just hoping they could get that stone rolled away. That was like one last burial so they could do what they were called to do and care for the body of Jesus. They were just hoping they could find a way. And God did. God found a way. That's why we come here on this Easter morn. God found a way, and they first experienced it, these women at the tomb. The stone was rolled away. A young man was there, and he was there to proclaim this good news that Jesus had risen from the dead, and that what they didn't even know they were waiting for had come true, and it was foretold in the Scriptures. Jesus had said, the Son of Man must suffer and die, but after 3 days, rise again. And St. Paul picks up on this language today in this promise. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, St. Paul writes that Jesus was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. On the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. What did Paul mean? Paul meant in accordance with the Hebrew Scriptures, that the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, they talked about this pattern, this theme of third day, that something would happen, something would go wrong, something would be life-changing, life-altering, and then there would be a time in between, a time of waiting, and then God would do something new. In the book of Genesis, Abraham is asked to sacrifice his only son Isaac. And then there's a time of waiting. And then on the third day, a ram is provided, so he doesn't have to make that sacrifice. In the story of the Hebrew people following their exodus from slavery in the wilderness, there was a time of waiting. And God said, on the third day, meet me at this mountain, and I will make you a new promise. And I will make you a new people. And Jonah the prophet, in that story, he tried to go the exact opposite way of where God was calling him. But God, he got himself thrown off a ship and then swallowed up by a great fish. And on the third day, Jonah was delivered onto the shores of Nineveh so he could proclaim God's word. There's an ending or an event. There's a time of in-between. And then God does something new. But boy, that time in between is difficult. Nobody likes waiting. None of us like waiting. We try to orchestrate our life so we don't have to wait. We go to traffic apps to see what the best commute time is, the best route to take, so we can avoid waiting in traffic. All of us are trying in some form to use AI to see if we can make our lives easier and more efficient so we don't have to do these tasks that we dislike and wait. It's why my dad used to hate long Sunday services, because he knew if it was a long service, we wouldn't beat the Baptist to Luby's cafeteria. He didn't want to wait in that line for our meringue pie. We try to avoid waiting. And boy, if we're in a long line, and our smartphone's at 5%, we know we're going to have to talk to people or stare off into the distance. No one wants that. These in-between times are difficult, but they can be holy times. They can be set-aside times for God to help us learn something new, to prepare us for the new beginning. In the time of waiting, one thing we can do is pray. Pray for God's presence and guidance. And we can pursue God's will during that time as we're trying to be patient for what we're waiting for. We can pursue God's will and let God show us again our true identity, the things that we can truly count on, and the new thing that God is doing. Today's gospel, the women in today's gospel, they're told by the young man at the tomb, but go and tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. Jesus goes ahead of you, the young man tells the women. He goes ahead of you, so you don't have to be afraid. We're told in this ending of the Gospel of Mark that they say nothing to no one about what they've experienced. Yeah, but eventually word got out, right? So they eventually told, and they were the first proclaimers of the good news. But first the young man says, don't be afraid. Because fear is one of those barriers that gets in the way of seeing ourselves and others a certain way. It's a barrier, so don't be afraid, because Jesus has won the victory that you weren't even expecting over sin, over death, over evil. And Jesus goes ahead of you, no matter what you face. God is not promising us that our life won't have more struggles and more barriers to face. What Jesus is promising us, that those barriers will never get in our way of our relationship with him. That he always goes ahead of us to meet us into the future he has prepared for us. To lead us out of darkness into light. To lead us out of an ending into a new beginning. And a new way of doing life with him. So let us leave with this proclamation today, embracing this promise of new life. Let us share this good news, like the women in today's gospel, that Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. Amen.